The courtroom was a furnace of whispers, every eye pinned on me as I stood in the witness box, my heart hammering like it wanted to break free. My father, Judge Everett Langston, sat high on the bench, his gavel a silent threat, his face a mask of stone I'd never seen him wear in public. I was 22, barely out of college, and I just told a room full of strangers, and him, that I was in love with a man named Caleb Monroe. The air thickened as my words landed. My father's gaze, sharp as a blade, cut through me, but I held my ground. I'd spent years hiding, suffocating under the weight of his expectations, his legacy as Pinewood's moral compass. Today I was done. "You cannot do this," he said, his voice low but seismic, each syllable a gavel strike. The courtroom gasped, not because of the case, a small-town dispute over a pride flag on public property, but because Everett Langston's son had just come out in front of half the town. Caleb sat in the back row, his dark curls catching the light through the tall windows. He was 24, a mechanic with hands rough from work but soft when they held mine in secret. His hazel eyes locked on me, steady, promising we'd get through this. I wanted to run to him, to drown out the murmurs, but my father's voice anchored me to the stand. "This is not the place, Daniel," he said, leaning forward, his judicial robe making him look like a shadow giant. "You will not turn my courtroom into a spectacle." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's not a spectacle, Dad. It's my life." The words burned as they left me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Anger, maybe shame. He banged the gavel, adjourning the session, and I stepped down, legs shaking, knowing I'd just cracked the foundation of our family. Pinewood, Ohio, was a town of picket fences and unspoken rules. My father had been its judge for 20 years, a man who believed in order, tradition, and the kind of love that fit neatly into a church pew. I grew up in his shadow, the only child of Everett and Clara Langston, expected to follow his path to law school, to marry a nice girl, to carry the family name. But I'd known since I was 15, sneaking glances at boys in gym class, that I'd never fit his mold. Meeting Caleb at a community fair 2 years ago had turned that quiet truth into a roaring fire. Caleb was everything Pinewood wasn't. Open, unafraid, with a laugh that made my chest ache. He'd moved here from Chicago, chasing a quieter life, fixing cars at Miller's auto shop. We'd met over a spilled coffee at the fair, his quick grin disarming me as he handed me napkins. By the end of the night, we were sitting on a park bench, talking about everything but the fact that I was terrified to want him. He'd kissed me under the stars, and I'd known I was done pretending. Now, as I left the courthouse, Caleb was waiting outside, leaning against his beat-up truck. The summer sun made his skin glow, and I wanted to collapse into him. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, like he knew the answer but needed to hear it. "No," I admitted, glancing back at the courthouse doors. "But I'm not sorry." He took my hand, his calluses grounding me. "You were brave in there, Dan. Braver than most." I wanted to believe him, but the weight of my father's words clung to me. "You cannot do this." It wasn't just about the courtroom. It was about me, about us, about a life he couldn't accept. I looked at Caleb, his jaw set, his eyes fierce with loyalty, and I knew I'd fight for this, for him, no matter what it cost. That night, I went home to the house I'd grown up in, a colonial on Maple Street with a porch swing and my mother's rose garden. She was in the kitchen, her hands flour-dusted from baking, her eyes soft but wary. "Daniel," she said, setting down a rolling pin, "your father's upstairs. He's upset." "I know," I said, my voice tight. "I didn't mean to blindside him, Mom." But I couldn't lie anymore. She nodded, her lips trembling. Clara Langston was gentle, a peacemaker, but she'd always deferred to my father. He loves you, she said, but he's scared. For you, for what this town will say. I don't care about the town, I snapped, then softened. I care about him, and Caleb. She hugged me, her apron smelling of vanilla, and I felt like a kid again, wanting her to fix everything. But this wasn't her fight. It was mine. Upstairs, my father was in his study, the door half open. I knocked, my heart in my throat. He looked up from his desk, papers scattered, his tie loosened. "Daniel," he said, his voice flat, "what do you want?" "To talk," I said, stepping inside. The room smelled of old books and whiskey. "I'm not changing who I am, Dad. I love Caleb. I'm not ashamed of it." His jaw tightened, and he stood, towering over me. "You think this is about shame? This is about your future. This town, this world, it's not kind to people like you. I'm trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I laughed, bitter. "You humiliated me today. You made me feel like I was wrong for existing." He flinched, and for a moment, I saw the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, not the judge. But then his face hardened. "You're my son. I won't watch you throw your life away." I left without another word, the door slamming behind me. Outside, the night was warm, the stars sharp against the sky. I drove to Caleb's apartment, a small place above the auto shop, and fell into his arms. "He'll come around," Caleb whispered, his lips against my hair. "He has to." I wanted to believe him, but as I lay awake that night, his breathing steady beside me, I wondered if my father's love had limits I'd never seen before. And if it did, what would I do when I hit them? The weeks after the courtroom showdown were a slow bleed. Pinewood's gossip mill churned, and I felt the stares at the grocery store, the coffee shop, even the gas station. Caleb and I kept our heads down, but every whisper felt like a bruise. My father didn't speak to me, not at home, not anywhere. Mom tried to bridge the gap, leaving voicemails about Sunday dinners, but I couldn't face him. Not yet. Caleb was my anchor. We'd meet at the edge of town, a quiet spot by Willow Creek where the water murmured and the world felt less heavy. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in pinks and oranges, he pulled me close. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked, his voice soft but serious. "Pinewood," I said, tossing a pebble into the creek. "All the time, but it's home, and running feels like letting them win." He nodded, his fingers tracing circles on my hand. "I'd go anywhere with you, Dan. Chicago, New York, some nowhere town in Montana. Doesn't matter." I looked at him, his face half lit by the fading sun, and my chest tightened. "I don't deserve you," I said. He laughed, sharp and bright. "Don't start that. You're stuck with me." But the weight of Pinewood was relentless. At work, I was a junior clerk at a law firm, a job my father had pulled strings to get. I overheard colleagues muttering about the judge's kid and that scene in court. One day, my boss, Mr. Hargrove, called me into his office. He was a wiry man with a penchant for bow ties and a knack for avoiding eye contact. "Daniel," he said, shuffling papers. "Folks are talking. It's distracting. Maybe take some time off." "Time off?" I said, my voice sharp. "You mean because I'm gay?" He flinched, adjusting his glasses. "It's not that. It's just the firm's reputation." I walked out, my resignation letter on his desk by noon. I didn't tell Caleb until that night, when we were sprawled on his couch, a pizza box between us. "You quit," he said, sitting up, his eyes wide. "Dan, that was your shot at law school." I don't want their version of a future, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I want ours. He kissed me, slow and fierce, and for a moment, the world was just us. But reality crept back. Without a job, I couldn't afford my apartment, and moving in with Caleb felt like a step we weren't ready for. Not because we didn't want it, but because Pinewood's eyes were always watching. Then came the festival. Pinewood's annual harvest fair was the town's pride. A weekend of music, food, and small-town charm. Caleb and I had gone last year, careful to act like just friends. This year I wanted more. Let's go together, I said one night, my head on his chest. As us. He hesitated, his fingers stilling in my hair. You sure? People will talk. Let them, I said, the defiance in my voice surprising even me. The fair was a riot of color and noise. Booths selling apple pie, kids chasing balloons, a band playing country covers. Caleb and I walked hand in hand, my pulse racing every time someone glanced our way. Most people smiled or looked away, but a few older folks, friends of my father, frowned, their whispers trailing us like shadows. At the Ferris wheel we stopped, and Caleb pulled me into a kiss, quick but deliberate, right there in the open. My heart soared, but I caught a familiar figure in the crowd. My father, standing by the cotton candy stand, his face unreadable. Dan, Caleb said, following my gaze. You want to talk to him? No, I said too quickly. Not here. But later, as we sat on a blanket watching fireworks, my father approached. He was out of his robes in a flannel shirt, looking more like a dad than a judge. Daniel, he said, his voice gruff. Can we speak? Caleb squeezed my hand, a silent go-ahead. I followed my father to a quieter corner of the fairground, the air thick with the smell of popcorn and grass. I didn't expect to see you here, he said, his eyes on the ground. Not like this. Like what? I asked, my voice sharp. Happy. He flinched, then met my eyes. I'm trying, Daniel. I don't understand this choice of yours, but I'm trying. It's not a choice, I said, my voice low but firm. It's who I am, and Caleb's who I love. He nodded, slow, like he was carrying something heavy. I don't want to lose you, he said, almost a whisper. Then don't, I said, my throat tight. But you have to accept me. All of me. He didn't answer, just turned and walked back into the crowd. I stood there, the fireworks bursting above, feeling like I'd won a battle but not the war. Caleb found me, his arms slipping around my waist. You okay? He asked. I don't know, I said, leaning into him, but I'm glad you're here. That night, as we lay in his bed, the fair's music still echoing in my head, I realized something. My father's words, his attempt to reach out, were a crack in his armor. Small, fragile, but there. I didn't know if it would grow, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could change. The next year was a tightrope walk. Caleb and I carved out a life together, moving into a small apartment on the edge of Pinewood, a place with creaky floors and a view of the railroad tracks. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I found work at a bookstore in nearby Canton, shelving novels and dodging questions about my father. Caleb's job at the auto shop kept us afloat. His hands always stained with grease, but his smile brighter than ever. We built routines, coffee on Saturday mornings, movie nights with takeout, walks by the creek where we'd first dreamed of leaving. But Pinewood's judgment lingered. Anonymous letters appeared in our mailbox, some with Bible verses, others with slurs. Caleb burned them in the backyard, his jaw tight, but I saw the worry in his eyes. "We're stronger than this," he'd say, pulling me close. I believed him, but the hate wore me down, like water eroding stone. My mother became our quiet ally. She dropped by with casseroles, her smiles tentative but warm. "Your father asks about you," she said one afternoon, setting a dish of lasagna on our table. "He doesn't say much, but he does." I wanted to ask what he said, but the words stuck. Instead, I hugged her, grateful for her effort. She never mentioned Caleb by name, but she didn't flinch when he joined us, his charm easing the tension. "Thanks, Mrs. Langston," he'd say, and she'd nod, her eyes softening. My father was another story. We'd pass each other in town, him in his car, me on the sidewalk, and he'd nod, nothing more. Once, at the hardware store, he spoke. "You're looking well, Daniel," he said. His voice clipped, like he was reading from a script. I mumbled a reply, my heart twisting. I wanted my dad back, not this stranger in a judge's robe. Then came the rally. Pinewood's first Pride event, small but bold, organized by a group of college kids and a few locals, including Caleb's friend Maya, a bartender with a knack for rallying crowds. Caleb and I volunteered, painting signs and handing out flyers. The night before, we lay awake, nerves buzzing. "You think anyone will show?" I asked, tracing the lines of his palm. "Doesn't matter," he said, kissing my forehead. "We will." The rally was on the town square, a patch of grass framed by the courthouse and a diner. 50 people came. More than I'd hoped, less than I'd dreamed. Maya led chants, her voice carrying over the crowd. Caleb and I held a sign that read, "Love wins." Our hands linked, our smiles defiant. Across the square, counter-protesters gathered, their signs quoting scripture, their voices loud but outnumbered. I saw my father before he saw me. He stood at the courthouse steps, not in his robes, just a man in a gray coat, watching. My stomach churned. Was he here to judge us, to shut this down? I nudged Caleb, who followed my gaze. "Stay calm," he whispered. "He's just watching." Maya handed me the megaphone, her eyes sparkling. "Your turn, Dan." I froze, the weight of the moment crushing. But Caleb's hand on my back steadied me. I stepped forward, my voice shaking at first, then growing stronger. "I'm Daniel Langston," I said, the crowd quieting. "I grew up here in a town that taught me to hide. But I'm done hiding. I love Caleb Monroe, and I'm proud of it. This is our home, too." The crowd cheered, and Caleb's grin lit up the square. But my eyes were on my father. He didn't move, didn't clap, but he didn't leave. For a moment, our gazes locked, and I saw something new. Confusion, maybe, or curiosity. Then he turned and walked away. That night, Caleb and I celebrated at Maya's bar, the air thick with laughter and cheap beer. "You were incredible," Caleb said, his arm around me. "Your dad saw it. That's something." "Maybe," I said, sipping my drink. "But it's not enough." Days later, a letter arrived, not anonymous, but in my father's precise handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. "Daniel," it read, "I don't understand your world, but I'm listening. Meet me for coffee. Please." No signature, just his initials, EL. I stared at the note, hope and fear colliding. Caleb read it over my shoulder, his breath warm on my neck. "You going?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I have to." The coffee shop on Main Street smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, its windows fogged from the autumn chill. My father was already there, seated at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a mug. He looked smaller without his robes, his gray hair catching the light. I slid into the chair across from him. My stomach nodded. "Daniel," he said, his voice softer than I'd expected. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, unsure what to say. The silence stretched, heavy with years of unspoken words. Finally, he spoke. "I saw you at the rally. You surprised me." "Surprised you how?" I asked, my tone guarded. "You were fearless," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "I didn't know you had that in you." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "I've had to be, Dad. You didn't leave me much choice." He winced, and I almost felt guilty. Almost. "I was wrong," he said, the words slow like they hurt to say. "In the courtroom, I reacted poorly. I thought I was protecting you. But I see now I was protecting myself." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "From what?" "From change," he said simply. "From a world I don't understand. I've spent my life upholding rules, Daniel. But rules don't always mean right." I wanted to believe him, but the memory of his gavel, his cold, "You cannot do this," still stung. "What's changed?" I asked. "You saw me with Caleb. You saw the rally. Why now?" He sighed, rubbing his temple. "Your mother. She's been relentless, showing me articles, books, even dragged me to a talk at the library about your community. I'm trying to learn, Daniel. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying." I leaned back, processing. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was more than I'd expected. "What does this mean for us?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I don't want to lose you. Can we start somewhere?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, somewhere." We talked for an hour, awkward at first, then easier. He asked about Caleb hesitantly, and I told him about our life, our dreams. He listened, really listened, for the first time in years. When we parted, he hugged me, brief, stiff, but real. I drove home to Caleb, my heart lighter but still wary. Over the next months, things shifted. My father invited us to dinner, a tense evening where Caleb's charm softened the edges. Mom beamed, piling our plates with roast chicken, and my father asked Caleb about his work, his life in Chicago. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Then came the proposal. Caleb and I had talked about marriage, half joking, half serious, but one night, under the stars by Willow Creek, he got down on one knee. "Daniel Langston," he said, holding a simple silver ring, "I want forever with you. Will you marry me?" I laughed through tears, pulling him up to kiss him. "Yes," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Yes." We planned a small wedding, just family and close friends, at a vineyard outside Pinewood. I didn't expect my father to come, let alone approve, but I sent the invitation anyway. To my shock, he called. "I'd like to be there," he said, his voice steady. "If you'll have me." The wedding day was crisp, the vineyard glowing under a September sun. Caleb looked stunning in a navy suit, his curls tamed for once. I wore gray, my hands shaking as I adjusted my tie. Maya officiated, her voice warm and steady. My mother cried softly in the front row, her hand in my father's. When it came time for the rings, my father stood. I froze, thinking he'd object, but he walked to us, his face unreadable. He took the ring from Maya, his hand steady, and placed it in my palm. "Daniel," he said, his voice low but clear, "I was wrong. Love is love." Then he turned to Caleb, handing him the other ring. "Take care of my son." Caleb nodded, his eyes shining. "Always." My father stepped back, and as Caleb slid the ring onto my finger, I felt the weight of years lift. The crowd cheered, But all I saw was Caleb, my husband, and my father finally seeing me. The wedding marked a turning point, but life didn't magically resolve. Pinewood was still Pinewood, slow to change, quick to whisper. Caleb and I settled into married life, our apartment now filled with shared books and mismatched mugs, but the town's undercurrent of judgment lingered. We'd catch sidelong glances at the diner, hear hushed comments at the market. Most days we shrugged it off, but some nights I'd lie awake, wondering if we'd ever truly belong. My father's gesture at the wedding had cracked open a door, but it didn't swing wide overnight. He called sometimes, asking about my job at the bookstore or Caleb's latest project at the shop. Once he even stopped by, bringing a bottle of wine and an awkward smile. "Your mother insists I try this," he said, setting it on our table. Caleb teased him about his taste in Merlot, and for a moment we were just three people, not a judge and his defiant son. But the past wasn't erased. At a town council meeting, when a proposal for a community center with an LGBTQ plus support group came up, my father hesitated. I was there, sitting in the back with Caleb, my heart sinking as he spoke cautiously about budget concerns. The room buzzed with tension, and I felt Caleb's hand tighten on mine. Afterward, I confronted him outside the courthouse. "Budget concerns?" I said, my voice sharp. "Or is it just easier to stay neutral?" He sighed, his breath visible in the cold night air. "Daniel, I'm not against it, but I have to think about the town, the voters. Change takes time." "Time?" I snapped. "Dad, I've been waiting my whole life for you to catch up." He looked at me, his eyes tired but earnest. "I'm trying, son. I'm not perfect." I walked away, frustrated but not hopeless. Caleb pulled me close as we drove home, his voice steady. "He's come a long way, Dan. Give him a chance." I nodded, but the ache remained. I wanted more than effort. I wanted him to fight for us, for me the way I'd fought for myself. Months later, a crisis tested that hope. Maya, our fierce ally, was attacked one night outside her bar. A group of guys, outsiders, not locals, had targeted her for her role in the Pride rally. She was okay, just bruised, but the news hit Pinewood like a shockwave. Caleb and I visited her in the hospital, her arm in a sling but her spirit unbroken. "They don't scare me," she said, grinning. "But we need that community center now." The attack galvanized the town. At the next council meeting, Caleb and I organized a group to speak. Locals, young and old, straight and queer, demanding action. I stood at the podium, my voice steady despite the nerves. "This isn't just about Maya," I said. "It's about all of us. We need a place where everyone feels safe." My father was there, presiding as judge. His face was unreadable, but when the vote came, he spoke last. "I've heard you," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "The center will be funded. Pinewood stands for everyone." The room erupted in cheers, and Caleb pulled me into a hug, his lips brushing my ear. "He did it," he whispered. I looked at my father, and for the first time, I saw pride in his eyes. Not for his legacy, but for me. That night, we celebrated at Maya's bar, now reopened, the jukebox blaring. My father showed up, surprising us all, a beer in hand. He raised it to Maya, then to us. "To progress," he said, and the room toasted with him. Later, as Caleb and I danced, slow and close, I felt the weight of years shift. My father wasn't perfect, but he was trying. And maybe in this small town that was enough to start. Years passed, and Pinewood changed, slowly but surely. The community center opened, a modest building with a rainbow flag out front. a place where kids like I'd been could find refuge. Caleb and I volunteered there, leading workshops, sharing our story. We weren't heroes, just two guys who'd fought for their place and wanted others to have the same. My father retired from the bench, his robes hung up for good. He spent more time with us, showing up for barbecues, even joining us for Pride one year, his awkward wave drawing laughs from Maya. He and Caleb found common ground, debating cars and baseball, their laughter filling our apartment. Mom, ever the peacemaker, beamed at the sight. One spring, Caleb and I decided to renew our vows. Not because we needed to, but because we wanted to, 10 years after that first kiss under the stars. We chose the vineyard again, the place where my father had placed the ring in my hand. This time he asked to officiate. Under a sky streaked with pink, we stood together, Caleb's hand warm in mine. My father, no longer a judge but just dad, spoke with a voice thick with emotion. "Love is not always easy," he said, looking at us, then the small crowd. "But it's always worth it. Daniel, Caleb, you've taught me that." He placed the new rings on our fingers, his hands steady, his eyes wet. "I was wrong once," he said, soft enough for just us to hear. "But I'm proud to be here now." Caleb squeezed my hand, his smile brighter than the sun. I looked at my father, the man who'd once said, "You cannot do this," now blessing our forever. The crowd cheered, but all I felt was gratitude. For Caleb, for my family, for a town that was learning to love better. As we danced under the stars, Caleb whispered, "We made it, Dan." "Yeah," I said, my voice catching. "We did." Pinewood wasn't perfect, and neither were we. But in that moment, with my husband's arms around me and my father's blessing in my heart, it was enough. More than enough.